Hello and welcome to Philharmonious, the podcast of the Czech Philharmonic. My name is Ian Mikiska and our guest today is Antoine Tamestit, a violist whose repertoire spans from Baroque music to contemporary works specifically written for him. Antoine came to Prague to perform Bohuslav Martinu's viola concerto, and we discuss themes including his approach to learning new repertoire, the inspiration he finds in orchestras, conductors and instruments, and why he feels at home in Prague. I hope you enjoy our talk. Antoine, welcome. Thank you for joining us. This is not your first time in Prague or playing with the Czech Philharmonic. How does it feel to be back?
It's wonderful, especially after last year's residency at the Spring Festival. I started to feel really at home. I stayed more than 2 weeks, and knowing the way to the artist entrance of the Rudolfinum, knowing the backstage and having this atmosphere, knowing the incredible sound of the Rudolfinum big hall and the orchestra in it that knows how to play in this hall. All this feels like the best memories, and as if you have your family memories, and it feels so heartwarming. I really get inspired by this city, and I love to know it more through the back streets and the back entrances, and feeling like I live here for a little while. So I really love that feeling.
This is something I guess you don't get to experience so often with a schedule like yours touring. You don't stay anywhere for that long usually, except for Paris, I imagine.
Exactly. Now I have 2 homes, Paris and Vienna. So it's always been these cities where I stay more. But I have always actually tried more and more, even in 3-4 days, staying somewhere to do little things. Really, sometimes it can just be a coffee or a walk to a certain street or monument or park that you like, just to feel that you have things that repeat a little bit like home. And so I have developed a real love for making any city a kind of home, even for 3-4 days, even cities that are aesthetically not as beautiful as Prague, which is about every city in the world. But, it's so important, and it shows that the home is where you put it. And for me, it's very much in the music. And so all this to say that Prague actually is the most inspiring.
So when you go somewhere for these 3 or 4 days and you explore the city and you find your little cafe, do you find this also kind of develops your relationship with the orchestra in that city as well, or with the music that you're playing?
Definitely. I'm very much into the culture, and so the people of a country, of a city, have a certain culture, a certain personality. There is an atmosphere, there is a color, there is a sense of humor, there is a way to be. Maybe people are distant at first, but then you get to know them and they are very true, very warm. I've discovered this in Asia. Sometimes in Japan, there is a politeness, a respect, a little bit of a distance, but then they are very, very true, and they really want, when they get social, they really get closer. And when they go to the concert hall, they listen so carefully, and they react to the music at the end in a very proper way, but they are really passionate. And then other cities in Europe, you feel such a warmth. Here in the Czech Republic, that's what I feel. I don't know if I'm right, but for me, the culture is very warm, is very friendly, and we call people quickly by the first name, and it's like a friendly atmosphere. I go to a cafe, and right away, there is, how do you like your coffee? It's not just I'm taking an order. And I find that the culture and the language, for me, it's very important, the language, which kind of consonances, and in Czech, it's very important, the consonances, is related to the sound that musicians make. And I found this all over the world. Might be my invention, but I find that Russian language can be felt in Russian sound for the string players, for example. But it's also true of French, Italian, Spanish,
Scottish.
American, Scottish. I hear it in the sound, in the bow. And so for me, it's very important to go walk around in the streets, meet people, hear a language that I don't understand. I don't understand the words, but I do understand the tone and the sound and the color. And then it makes me closer to the orchestra that doesn't matter where the people are from, but they've been living here. They live this sound. So that's their culture. And so I get really inspired by that.
Mm-hmm. And one of my questions is whether when you're performing as a soloist with an orchestra, whether what's more important is the orchestra or the conductor. Obviously, they're both important, but it sounds from this like really it's the sound of the orchestra, where they live, where they come from, that's somehow very inspiring for you.
Yes, but I find that what I love the best in a conductor is that actually their instrument, they are also instrumentalists, but their instrument is the orchestra. And the greatest conductors for me are, as a soloist, for example, is when I feel actually it's a duo and they contain everything that's in front of them as if it was a huge viola or violin, and it contains the winds and the brass and the strings and the range of the basses to the high violin. But in a way, there is a little bubble that could be created, ideally, between soloist and conductor, and you actually feel that you're just playing a duo. And that's usually what I look for. But you are completely right also. I feel inspired by the wave of the size of the orchestra.
I find that a really beautiful thing. You discuss it quite often, taking inspiration from the orchestra and the way the orchestra plays. It's something that
completely.
You don't hear from many soloists, let's say, or even conductors. I think there is this kind of still vision of the genius who comes and it will be like this. But I imagine
I'm a
also
viola player, and it's important. It's not only a joke, but it's also important because my career, even though it's 70-80% of concertos with orchestra, my education, my build-up, the personality of my instrument is to be in the middle of chamber music, orchestra. Even if you play a duo for violin and viola, for example, you will be a supporting voice. When you play a sonata for viola and piano, it's not only leading. Sometimes it's very much intricate with the piano. And in some concertos, the most famous one that comes to my mind now is Berlioz's Harold in Italy. The viola solo part is mixed so much with the orchestra, and you are not just a genius in front that has the confidence. Actually, Berlioz shows that sometimes as a soloist you're not sure and you try more to get into a dialogue with the orchestra. And so over the years, I feel I've developed, sometimes to the surprise of the orchestra, a lot of gestures of turning towards them and playing real chamber music. And you can somehow take in a whole section or a whole group, but you can also take the first stanza, for example, or a solo oboe, and really try to play a chamber music. And it has to do also with the posture and with the eyes and then with the body language inside the music. But to make it more chamber music like the concerto repertoire, I find is only an improvement.
And it really, I think you're right that it's important that you're a viola player, that you, not only is it an instrument that has these different roles, but it also has them, changing within seconds sometimes, that you have to support and then come out with a solo.
Yeah.
Is it also, do you find, going back to this idea of taking inspiration from the orchestra, do you also find that you like working with conductors who feel this way and who are inspired by the soloist and the orchestra?
And if we get really precise and honest about this, you sometimes meet a conductor that has been maybe wrongly used to a soloist that just does their thing. And so I love the challenge to, without talking about it, and it's in the little things, sometimes a gesture, sometimes the eyes, the vision, but also sometimes just breathing together and feeling what is the dynamic of that conductor and how can I get into it and show without forcing, without saying, no, I want to slow down here. That for me is not natural. And we are both human beings, both musicians. I think we can find each other without talking, just with the sound. My teacher, Tabea Zimmermann, used to tell me, lead with your sound. So without showing. She didn't want me to do strong movements, for example, like an upbeat that you will show people, but more that your sound is so clear. Also the changes of harmony inside your sound, like the changes of mood inside your sound, they are so clear that actually everything becomes natural. And I do the same the other way around. I listen or I look at the conductor to find what is the natural gesture here. If suddenly it happens sometimes, if suddenly the tempo is not the one that I imagined, it happens actually very often. It's not necessarily the tempo you imagine. Instead of going against it right away, I always tell myself what my American teacher said to me, Jesse Levine. He said, just don't say no. Don't start by saying no. Start by saying maybe. Why not? And that philosophy in the moment is very important. That's the flexibility. And maybe, I just say, the conductor, he or she has an idea of the tempo that maybe could be interesting that I haven't seen yet. So let's give it a shot. Let's maybe give it 2 chances at least, and then discuss. Or can I maybe find my color and my feelings inside their tempo? There is nobody who's right. But finding compromises and a mixed language, that's really interesting.
But it must be very difficult if you've spent months before this first rehearsal, practicing it in a particular way and really getting out the colors and the feelings in this tempo, to then have to take a completely new one. It takes a lot of flexibility and...
Exactly. But then you open the next question, which is, how do we practice? What do we practice for? Do we practice for this like way this, and no other way? Or I'd rather think that I practice to find out many possibilities, and maybe in 2 or 3 passages, not more, I will have a strong opinion about something, but then I have to really think about this. Why do I have this strong opinion? And again, my American teacher always said, it's important the day that you die, that you don't have all the answers, but that you tell yourself that you have asked all the questions. And so I'd rather really practice by asking myself a lot of questions. What would I do if it was this way? what is this harmony really meaning? And the only time when I don't completely do that is when I play a modern piece and I have the composer in front of me, and then I ask more questions and I get their answer. And I consider their answer is right.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But that's all.
It's interesting, I think, this idea of practice. Again, you've talked about kind of living with the piece, but also in the sense that if you try a new fingering or a new dynamic, you live with it, you let it kind of settle in. How do you manage to find the time for this? I think in this kind of tempo that we're living in, again, after COVID, it's quite hard. How do you manage?
I completely agree. And sometimes the life gives you things to do at a certain time, which is not the right time, not the ideal time. I found a new apartment recently and I had to move in between two concerts, and I'm literally in between right now doing that and moving into a new place from a distance. And so sometimes what I'm saying is that there are unexpected things in the life. I wish I was just completely free and thinking only about the Martinu viola concerto right now for 3-4 weeks and just playing it. But that's not how life is done. And I also have other projects, other concerts. I also have 2 children. I also have a partner. I also have books to read and things to do. I have to take care of myself, health-wise. And so I can get very overwhelmed. And my only answer is, for the moment, is you do what you can in the moment that you have. And that helps me particularly in practicing. And I'm pretty good at practicing well for half an hour, for example. I prefer 3 hours. Really, I do. But if I have half an hour, is it a waste of time? And am I just playing through half an hour? Or actually, today in half an hour, or it was yesterday actually, I had half an hour before I took my plane. I actually had a good practice session and I learned something and I tried some new things and I went a little further with the piece. So for me, that's a nice challenge. And with kids, with private life, with life changes, things that happen in the world, everything, the tempo that you're talking about, I think it's important to be dedicated to what you do in the moment.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned about 80% of your work is as a soloist with orchestra, but you also play chamber music. Is that a different situation in terms of time? And do you have a little bit more time when you play chamber music, or is it similar?
It's a little bit more time because most of the time the chamber music part might be technically less challenging. And I'm often asked for the same chamber music pieces I'm returning to. But that's, I would say, actually, that's the case also for concerto. It's just what is more challenging is in a concerto, your part is always heard at one point. And so you want the audience to understand and to understand your part, to understand the whole piece and to have the right emotions from the harmonies. And you are carrying not just one out of many parts, but the number one part, the part at the top. And people's ears, no matter if they are musicians or not, they follow a line, they follow a melody, and that has to make sense. And I feel that as a soloist, you are very much isolated in the listening. And so maybe it's more challenging. And some concertos are really just very hard. I keep playing them for the 10th time or 20th or 50th or sometimes 100, like the Mozart Sinfonia Concertante, for example, more than 100 times, I'm sure, and I still find it difficult. It's technically challenging. If you really want to bring out all the music, it's always difficult. So,
and your repertoire includes really broad range of music from Baroque, classical era, romantic, but also a lot of 20th and 21st century music. Did you ever feel the need to specialize on one of them, either from yourself or from outside? Any pressure like that, or?
No, actually, I made a point. I tried to make a point of the opposite, that I didn't want to specialize. But at the same time, in a way, you are kind of right, because I find that we should specialize as students and really dedicate ourselves to something when we are doing it. Like a lot of students, for example, study Bach. Johann Sebastian Bach is so important. His pieces are so challenging, wonderful, maybe the god or one of the gods of classical music. But I felt that I needed, already as a student, when I studied Bach, I studied Baroque. I tried a Baroque bow. Now recently I try, for the last 10, 15 years, I try gut strings, I try lower pitch, I try to understand the different intonation of Baroque music. So if I go into something, I go 100, 150% like a specialist. But I don't want to sustain this every week. I love the contrast. And actually, I found this a few years ago. If I play Ligeti or Hindemith, then my understanding of Bach helps me very much.
Absolutely.
But then if I play Bach the week after, I suddenly see, wow, he's so modern in a way, Bach. And I need the modern colors that I worked on with very contemporary music, how to control the colors in my bow or very difficult rhythm. Then it makes me better, or it makes me understand the music of Bach better. So I always feel things complement each other, and therefore I'm trying to do the difficult thing of not specializing, but therefore every week changing. And I was on gut strings 2 weeks ago with a classical bow, playing Schubert and at the pitch of 430, and going back to the origins, and then 1 week later playing a new concerto by Peter Oetwösch. And I love it. Really, I do.
But you stay on one instrument
Yes.
the whole time. It's always this Gustav Mahler,
Yes.
Stradivarius viola, and
Stradivarius.
so you're changing strings from gut to metal.
Exactly.
Also? Wow.
So that's my main change, but equally important is
The
a
bow.
change of pitch.
Okay.
And maybe the most important is the bow, actually.
So you have a Baroque bow, classical bow, and a modern bow?
Yeah, I have 2 modern bows, one from 1835, which is a bit softer and which I use for everything of the 19th century. As soon as I go into 20th century, my modern bow, so it is a copy of a bow of 19th century, but it was made recently, is really helping with the sound, with the new holes also we have to play in, sometimes the very big holes we have to play it. So I need not something louder, but something more clear. And then if I'm in a beautiful chamber music hall, my romantic bow from 1835 is perfect. So I have 4. And I could go more if you are, then that's why there are specialists. I could really have 10 different ones. But already, I have my limits. And so I already try to understand 4 bows. They all have their different weight and their different playing technique. And I already try to learn from that. And I even once played baroque bow and metal strings because I couldn't switch so quickly. And anyway, we were playing at modern pitch. And that's also interesting. You learn from every little change.
It's beautiful to have this input from so many sides, the orchestra, the instrument, the bow, the halls. And you mentioned the different concert halls. You've also played with some historical instrument orchestras with John Eliot Gardiner and with others. How is that, and especially I'm thinking about romantic music, how is it different to play with those orchestras in the period halls and a modern symphony orchestra with a big sound? How is it as a soloist for you? How is it different?
I will come back to only the colors. For me, that's maybe the most important thing. And I'm afraid that now it's a combination of modern instruments, modern strings, modern pitch, modern halls, which are bigger, and a sense of acoustic, because now with the modern halls, we always have an acoustician who does something, and they have their own opinion and taste, aesthetics of how sound should be. I'm afraid with this combination, we've come to equalizing things. Everything works better. Let's be honest. I mean, modern instrument, modern strings really are easier to play. That's for sure. But a modern piano, for example, that was just created, they try, I see pianists also talking about this, they try to even out the whole range of the piano. And then you come across an older piano. I recorded, for example, Brahms sonatas with a beautiful Bechstein from 1899. And suddenly, it is not equal. And maybe someone from today would say, but it's not as good in the high register than in the low register, or it's not balanced. But I would say something else, and now we can talk about the orchestras. Actually, it's more interesting because there are different colors. If I play Berlioz, Herald in Italy, with a modern orchestra, the balance actually is difficult to find. You have to constantly tell the brass to be careful, and Berlioz asks sometimes for 15 stands of first violin or something like this. Ridiculous. But he had 15 stands of older instruments with gut strings. And we don't know. I mean, in 1830, maybe there was a mix of bows, and some people had still their classical bows from 30 years before, and some people had the latest model of iPhone or of bow, actually. And so it is really not the same. And when I played Berlioz with period orchestra, especially with John Eliot Gardiner, the brass, the tuba, for example, the original tuba, was never overwhelming, but such a good, raw, dark sound, but not boomy and not swallowing the rest of the orchestra. It was a certain personality. And then you understand that passage, why he uses a tuba. And the strings, last movement of Herald in Italy, it's supposed to be an orgy of brigands. So something really rough and violent. With gut strings, you get that sound, that color right away.
Immediately.
And you understand the personality today with a modern orchestra, modern hall, modern strings. Actually, it sounds too nice.
It's very clean, yeah.
And then I have to say, excuse me, I have to say in the rehearsal, no, but it's an orgy of brigands. It's something really mean and violent, and you are interrupting the viola part. it's not nice music, but actually we've made it easily nice to play, to approach the instrument.
And this is something you have to fight against
And
almost.
I'm trying to fight against that. So I keep playing with the period orchestras to have more and more and more ideas of expression and colors. And sometimes, very often, I try to bring this to a modern orchestra, because a modern orchestra that is very good could also do anything.
So I think that's a great place to end. Thank you very much for joining us, Antoine.
Thank you so much.